So this HOA president really believed she could snatch my family's 80-year-old ranch and flip it into some overpriced luxury condo project. Biggest mistake of her miserable life. There I was, watching through my security cameras as Cordelia Blackthorne threw herself at my brand new biometric gate, shrieking threats at 2 in the morning like a banshee with a clipboard addiction. She'd been hammering on that steel barrier for almost 3 hours straight, her designer makeup melting off her face in black streaks. For 3 straight weeks before that night, she had been calling every government office from here all the way to Washington, D.C., demanding they force me to tear down a gate that sat on my own land. And the wildest part? The woman had already burned through $47,000 of stolen HOA funds trying to destroy me. By the time this story ends, she'll be serving years in federal prison, homeless, disgraced, and the punchline of every conversation in our county. But before we get to her downfall, let me ask you something. What would you do if someone tried to steal the land your family built with their bare hands? Drop it in the comments and tell me where you're watching from, because these HOA horror stories are spreading like wildfire across the country. Anyway, let me back up and introduce myself properly. I'm Dex Morrison, 45 years old, newly divorced, and for way too long I was suffocating in Portland's concrete box of a life. You know that soul-crushing feeling when you realize you're paying $3 grand a month just to stare at your neighbor's depressing brick wall? Yeah, that was my life. My kids, Tyler and Madison, only visited on weekends, and every time they slept in that cramped apartment, I felt like I was failing them. Then my unexpected Uncle Rusty passed away. The man was a walking legend in our family, half genius, half chaos gremlin, with a talent for solving problems in ways absolutely no one asked for. He once built a homemade trebuchet to launch his neighbor's illegally parked truck back onto their own property. And somehow, according to city code, it wasn't illegal. When he died, he left me $400,000 and a handwritten note. Go find a place where the air still feels like freedom. Challenge accepted. I spent weeks searching until I found it. A 47-acre ranch in Millfield County, Oregon. Forests older than my grandparents, a creek running clear as glass, a barn begging for restoration, and a price tag of $380,000 for land worth nearly double. Was it a red flag? Absolutely. Did I care? Not even a little. The seller, Bill Hutchkins, was a gentle old rancher with hands rough as tree bark and a voice that carried 80 years of stories. He told me he wanted to move closer to his grandkids in Arizona. When he handed me the keys, tears slipped down his cheeks. She's been good to 3 generations of my family, he whispered. Take care of her. I promised him I would. Moving, they felt like stepping into a different life. The crisp October air smelt like pine and wood smoke. Gravel crunched under the moving truck's tires like nature welcoming me home. My kids ran through the fields, laughing, their footsteps echoing between the trees. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a luxury. It felt like mine again. And then she appeared, the devil in designer khakis. Cordelia Blackthorne, 52, HOA president of Willowbrook Estates and self-declared guardian of community standards. She drove up in a snow-white Lexus SUV with vanity plates that read RULES1, like she needed the universe to know she was the final boss of pettiness. She marched down my driveway in spotless tennis shoes, gripping a clipboard like it was scripture. Her voice was thick with fake sweetness and the kind of arrogance only HOA presidents and tax auditors possess. "Excuse me," she announced while excusing absolutely nothing. "You'll need HOA approval for that moving truck." I stared at her over the box labeled Tyler's bunk bed, wondering if this was a prank. "Ma'am, this property isn't part of your HOA." Her smile twitched like someone had kicked a hornet's nest. "Meadowland Lane falls under shared community standards," she insisted, trying to sound important. "That truck violates non-resident vehicle regulations." She shoved a 47-page rule book at me, sections already highlighted like she'd been rehearsing this moment. I own this land outright, I reminded her calmly. Your development didn't even exist when this road was built. That's when her mask cracked. She whipped out her phone and started snapping photos of my plates. Then she pulled an actual tape measure out of her purse. Who does that? And started measuring my truck like it was a crime scene. Standing right there in my driveway, she called city code enforcement on speakerphone. Hello? Yes, I'd like to report a non-compliant commercial vehicle. While she was in full Karen mode, 3 joggers passed by. Every single one avoided eye contact like she was Medusa in yoga pants. One elderly man even crossed to the other side of the street. That's when it hit me. These people were terrified of this woman. Finally, she got back in her Lexus, rolled down the window, and delivered her parting threat. This neighborhood has standards, Mr. Morrison. Learn them quickly. She sped off in a cloud of gravel dust, leaving me staring after her, thinking about Uncle Rusty's trebuchet and wondering just how creative this war was about to get. Her harassment campaign didn't take long to ramp up. The following week, a city inspector named Pete knocked on my door at 7 a.m. Noise complaints, he said, looking embarrassed. I hadn't touched a single power tool yet. The loudest thing on my property was the creek. Pete sighed. Look, someone described constant construction noise, but I don't hear anything except birds. He apologized, did a quick walk around, and left shaking his head. Hours later, 3 utility trucks arrived, electric, water, and gas, all investigating irregular usage reports. The gas guy actually laughed when I told him I didn't even have gas service connected. By week 3, my postal carrier, Jimmy, filled me in. Man, she's done this to everyone. There was a single mom with 3 kids before you. Cordelia made her life hell. Filed so many complaints, she eventually moved away just for peace. That's when the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with a strict neighbor. I was dealing with a tyrant mastering psychological warfare. But what she didn't know, I'm an engineer. I don't fold. I document. And the war she started, she had no idea how badly she was going to lose it. Cordelia didn't waste a single day after sending that useless cease and desist letter. She escalated with the determination of someone who thought intimidation was a personality trait. The harassment moved from annoying to strategic, almost militaristic. Every morning at exactly 6, I'd wake to find her white Lexus parked sideways across Meadowlark Lane like some self-proclaimed guardian of suburban purity. She stood beside it with a clipboard and a mug labeled Boss Lady, pretending she was conducting inspections while blocking the only road leading to my ranch. I had no choice but to hike through wet grass and mud just to reach my own truck. And every time I passed her, she smirked like she just won a chess match. Sticky notes began appearing on my windshield. Tiny yellow squares carrying messages written in perfectly curved Catholic school cursive. Community harmony begins with individual sacrifice. Consideration for others must start with you. Non-conforming behavior affects us all. The more she wrote, the more it felt like she wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to rewrite my psychology, one passive-aggressive note at a time. And that was only the beginning. Around week 4, I realized she had taken surveillance to a level usually reserved for federal agencies. Cars I didn't recognize began parking along the edge of the shared road at all hours, morning, afternoon, late at night. At first, I thought it was coincidence, maybe bored neighbors or nosy dog walkers. But then I saw binoculars glinting in the morning sun, pointed directly at my barn. She had organized something she called a community safety patrol. But in reality, it was a rotating stalker squad of HOA board members watching my every move in 8-hour shifts like I was a zoo exhibit. The HOA president had turned my ranch into her personal Truman Show. They watched me feed my chickens. They watched me repair old fences. They even watched me take out trash bags, scribbling notes as if logging criminal activity. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so disturbing. I wasn't new to problems, but this was different. This was obsession wrapped in authority, powered by fear. So I did what engineers do best. I adapted. I upgraded my security system with night vision cameras, motion trigger recording, 4K resolutions that could capture the texture of a man's pores from 30 feet away. Every time someone walked past my property, slowly, suspiciously, holding clipboards or phones, I have footage. Every time Cordelia drove by with her window rolled down, hurling thinly veiled threats, I had audio. Every sticky note, every phone call, every smirk, every violation. It was all becoming evidence. It wasn't long before I met someone who had suffered under her rule. One afternoon, I stopped by Martinez Hardware to buy security camera batteries. And while reaching for the last pack, my hand bumped into someone else's. A guy in his 40s, broad shoulders, callous hands, wearing a faded construction jacket. He looked at me with the tired grin of a man who has seen hell and lived to talk about it. "You're the new guy she's been terrorizing. Welcome to the resistance, hermano." That's how I met Javier Gonzalez, over terrible diner coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the Clinton administration. He told me his story. Cordelia had fined him $500 for inappropriate work vehicle aesthetics, which was HOA language for, "Your truck has dents and I don't like it." Then he leaned in, lowering his voice. "My cousin works for the landscaping company that handles the HOA common areas. They haven't been paid in 4 months, but the HOA budget shows regular payments." That was the moment every piece started clicking into place. This wasn't just harassment. This was corruption, embezzlement, fraud, control. And I was her latest target because my land blocked the one thing she wanted more than power: profit. Armed with that information, I doubled down on documentation. I started logging every interaction with timestamps, backups, secure storage, something my engineering professors drilled into us. If it's not documented, it never happened. Within days, I had a digital vault of proof. Her property inspections with a tape measure, her photographing my barn from 16 angles, her timing my morning routine with a stopwatch like she was planning a military strike. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed to understand what she really wanted. So I dug deeper. Public records, shell companies, tax filings. What I found almost made me laugh at the insanity of it. Cordelia had created a development company, Meadowlark Development LLC, listing herself as the registered agent and principal owner. That alone violated multiple conflict of interest statutes for HOA board members. Even better, she had been using the HOA's tax-exempt status to buy materials for her personal renovation. Materials she claimed were community improvements. Her Instagram posts matched the receipts. The fancy dishwasher in her remodeled kitchen, bought under the HOA's vendor budget. The premium tile in her bathroom, HOA maintenance expense. She wasn't just a tyrant, she was a white-collar criminal wrapped in khaki slacks and spray tan. Once I had enough evidence to start connecting dots, patterns emerged. Families who didn't fit her ideal community image had been targeted for years. A veteran with PTSD, a Latina single mother, a black retired teacher, an immigrant family accused of offensive cooking odors. One by one, they had been harassed into moving. Their properties, bought by the same circle of developers tied to Cordelia's LLC. And guess what lay at the center of their long-term plan? My land. My land was the final piece in an $8 million luxury development project. That's why she was obsessed with me. That's why the harassment wouldn't stop. She needed my land to complete her empire of condos and control. But she had no idea who she was fighting. I had something none of her previous victims had: technical skills, patience, and the Morrison family's legendary stubborn streak. I launched my first counter move quietly. Every morning at 5, I'd jog around Willowbrook Estates, perfectly legal, public sidewalks, but my route conveniently looped past Cordelia's house 3 times. My footsteps echoed across her windows like war drums. She scrambled to her blinds every morning, trying to catch me breaking a rule that didn't exist. And while I jogged, my cameras back at the ranch captured her intensifying surveillance obsession. Meanwhile, I filed a harassment complaint with the county sheriff. Deputy Martinez, a man built like he'd been carved out of granite, reviewed the 3-inch folder I brought him, and he whistled low and said, "Most people don't know HOA officers can be charged with harassment. She's flirting with criminal behavior." He paid her a visit. Cordelia's face on the security feed went pale when he warned her about criminal charges. But warnings didn't stop her. If anything, they made her more desperate, more unhinged. The real turning point came days later when she made it personal. One evening, she walked up my driveway holding an envelope. Her smile looked stretched, unnatural, like her skin was too tight. "I know about your kids, Dex," she said, softly, almost sweetly. "Custody arrangements can be fragile." The envelope contained copies of my divorce documents, custody agreements, and my blood went cold. Surveillance photos of my children arriving for their weekend visits. She had followed them, photographed them, cataloged their routines. That wasn't harassment anymore. That was a threat. Not against me, against my family, against my blood, my children. When I looked up, her smile had grown wider, like she enjoyed watching the horror spread across my face. Unsafe environments. Child Protective Services might be interested. That was it. The line, the final boundary she crossed. She had no idea, but in that moment, the war changed. She wasn't dealing with a neighbor anymore. She was dealing with a father, and a father fighting for his children has no limits. I promised myself right then, if Cordelia wanted war, I would end it completely. And I would do it legally, publicly, and permanently, so she would never hurt another family again.
Cordelia threatening my children changed everything. Before that moment, I was documenting, defending, preparing, but after seeing my kids' photos in that envelope, something inside me snapped into place with perfect clarity. This wasn't about an HOA dispute anymore. This was about a dangerous woman waging psychological warfare on innocent people. And unlike the families she had crushed before me, I had proof, skills, and a mission. But Cordelia didn't slow down. She escalated like a wildfire fueled by paranoia. Every morning at dawn, she positioned her Lexus in such a way that she blocked half the shared access road, forcing me to squeeze past with inches to spare. She would stand there gripping her coffee mug, staring at me with dead eyes, waiting for any reaction she could twist into a complaint. Sticky notes continued piling up, on my truck, my gate, even my mailbox. Community compliance equals community respect. Non-resident energy creates disharmony. Beige is a calming color. Consider repainting. These weren't messages. They were psychological needles she used to probe for cracks in her victims. At night, the safety patrol cars stayed longer, their engines idling, binoculars aimed at my barn as if they expected me to detonate something. My kids noticed the tension the next time they came to visit. Tyler asked why people were watching our house. Madison asked why a lady in a Lexus was taking photos of them walking from my truck. I lied to protect them, but inside, rage crawled beneath my skin like electricity. The breaking point came 3 days later when I was reorganizing Uncle Rusty's old tools in the barn. I had the radio playing classic rock, the doors open to let the autumn air in. Everything smelled like sawdust and oil, familiar and comforting. But as the sun dipped behind the pines, I noticed movement through the cracked barn window. I stepped out quietly expecting a deer or raccoon, but instead found a black SUV parked at the curve of the access road. 2 figures inside had binoculars fixed on me. Not on my house, not on the road, on me. When my motion sensor lights flicked on, the SUV jolted and sped off, tires skidding on gravel. This wasn't HOA oversight. This was stalking. That night, as I reviewed my camera archives, a horrifying pattern emerged. Weeks of footage showing people watching me at all hours. Cordelia had built a 24/7 surveillance operation around my ranch. It was meticulous, obsessive, almost military. No wonder families before me had cracked. But I wasn't cracking. I was collecting ammunition. And I wasn't alone. The next day, at Martinez Hardware, I ran into Javier again. His cousin, who worked for the HOA landscaping contractor, had more news. "Bro, they're laundering money," Javier said, lowering his voice. "The books say they paid us 14 times this year, but we only got paid twice. Someone's pocketing the rest." I already suspected it, but hearing it from someone inside the system confirmed everything. The web was bigger than I thought. After coffee at the diner, Javier connected me to someone else, Martha Tatum, the owner of a food truck that Cordelia had harassed for 2 years with fake health complaints until Martha was forced to stop parking anywhere near Willowbrook Estates. Martha showed up with a folder of evidence, fabricated citations, photos, fraudulent inspection reports, everything signed by a community standards representative, Cordelia. I realized every victim Cordelia targeted had a pattern. They were vulnerable, alone, or unaware of their rights. She crushed them with paperwork, complaints, intimidation, and social pressure until they moved. But I was not moving. I was digging. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the blue glow of my laptop lighting stacks of printed documents, receipts, screenshots, emails, videos. The more I dug, the uglier it got. Cordelia's shell company, Meadowlark Development LLC, wasn't just poorly concealed, it was practically screaming fraud. She had listed her own home address as the registered office, used HOA funds to pay for building materials delivered to her property, and coordinated with a development consultant whose name popped up in county planning documents. Their goal was clear: acquire my land, connect the water line, expand into luxury condos, and rake in millions. My ranch wasn't part of her HOA, but it was a geographical choke point. Without it, their planned expansion was impossible, and this wasn't her first time. Property by property, she had driven families out, forced sales at low prices, and funneled those acquisitions into the same developer network. I found old sale records, 12 families in 10 years, Hispanic contractors, single mothers, veterans, elderly couples, immigrant families, anyone who didn't fit her curated, perfect community. She wasn't just an HOA tyrant, she was committing a decade-long pattern of discrimination, coercion, and organized theft disguised as community rule enforcement. Armed with proof, I contacted someone who could help expose it. Rosa Martinez, an investigative journalist with the Portland Tribune and Javier's cousin. When she responded to my email 20 minutes later asking to meet, I knew she sensed something big. The next morning, she arrived at my ranch with a camera, a notepad, and the energy of someone ready to uncover corruption. When I showed her the surveillance footage, financial records, HOA documents, and testimony from other victims, her eyebrows climbed higher with every page. "Dex, this isn't an HOA story," she said, voice low and focused. "This is organized crime." Hearing those words out loud sent a chill through me, but it also made everything make sense. We spent hours connecting dots, mapping connections, building a timeline. Rosa's investigative instincts were razor sharp. She identified patterns I didn't miss, like the fact that every property targeted by Cordelia had strategic value for development, and every family who resisted faced escalating harassment until they broke. She recognized signatures of racketeering, embezzlement, fraud, civil rights violations, and municipal corruption. Cordelia wasn't acting alone. City officials were involved too. Later that night, as I stepped onto my porch to clear my head, the cool air of the Oregon evening wrapped around me like a warning. The pines whispered, the creek bubbled softly, and for a moment everything felt peaceful. Then my phone buzzed. Motion alert. My heart sunk as I saw the feed, Cordelia's Lexus pulling up to my gate. She stepped out wearing a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked around carefully, then approached the camera and whispered, "You think you're safe because you have toys and paperwork, but I always win. I always do." Her voice was cold, flat, mechanical. She tapped the gate with one finger. "This land will be mine." Then she walked away. But what she didn't know was that her entire monologue was recorded in crystal clear quality, and as soon as I saved the footage, something shifted inside me. Fear evaporated. Determination settled. I knew then that Cordelia wasn't just spiraling, she was unraveling, and when people like her unravel, they become reckless. Recklessness creates evidence. Evidence creates justice, and I was going to deliver it.
Once Cordelia realized intimidation wasn't breaking me, she moved into full-scale sabotage, the kind that only someone truly unhinged and desperate would attempt. It started at 5 in the morning on a Wednesday when the growl of chainsaws tore me out of sleep. I stumbled outside in the freezing air wearing nothing but sweatpants and a t-shirt. And there it was, one of my oldest oak trees, a century-old giant, lying flat across my driveway like a fallen soldier. Fresh sawdust still floated in the air, glowing in the sunrise like powdered gold. A professional tree crew in unmarked trucks was already packing up equipment. When I demanded to know what they were doing, one of the men barely looked at me before muttering something about emergency storm damage. There hadn't been a storm in 3 weeks. The cut marks on the trunk were perfectly straight, clean, professional. This wasn't weather. This was a hit job. The worst part? When I checked my main security footage, the cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the hour it happened. But they didn't know I had a backup system hidden in the barn rafters, one Uncle Rusty installed years ago. That camera recorded everything. The trucks arriving at 4:12 a.m., the men cutting quickly, and Cordelia standing off to the side in a dark coat, watching the whole thing like a general overseeing her troops. Deputy Martinez came out to the ranch, watched the footage, and let out a long, exhausted whistle. "This is criminal mischief," he said. "But they paid cash, no plates, hard to trace. She knows exactly how to dance around the edges." He was right, but for the first time, I saw something new in his eyes. Not frustration, sympathy. He knew I wasn't imagining anything. 3 days later, things got even darker. A caseworker from Child Protective Services showed up at my gate. Her name was Janet, a tired-looking woman whose eyes held the exhaustion of someone who dealt with real problems, not manufactured ones. "Mr. Morrison," she said gently, "someone filed a detailed report alleging environmental hazards, dangerous living conditions, and exposure to chemicals on your property." She showed me photos included with the report, pictures taken from angles only someone spying on my ranch would know. Uncle Rusty's old electronics equipment had been labeled as suspicious devices. My water testing kit, purchased because Cordelia poisoned my well, was described as chemical manufacturing. My kids' camping gear had been photographed and called unsafe child sleeping arrangements. Janet sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, I have to investigate every claim, even when it's obviously malicious." She walked the property and quickly realized the complaints were lies. "I've dealt with cases like this before," she said as she left. "This isn't about the children. This is someone trying to hurt you." And she was right. It wasn't about my kids. It was about control. Then came the insurance fraud attempt. My homeowner's insurance called, saying Cordelia had filed a claim describing an aggressive dog on my property that bit her. I don't even own a dog. She included staged bite photos, but the bite marks were from a golden retriever, not a German shepherd she claimed I had. Even the insurance investigator laughed on the phone. "Mr. Morrison, I've seen some sloppy fraud, but this one takes the cake." But even false claims trigger paperwork, inspections, delays. Her weapon wasn't strength, it was exhaustion. Death by 1,000 tasks she tried to bury me under. Next came the DEA. Yes, the actual Drug Enforcement Administration. They showed up because someone, gee, I wonder who, filed an anonymous tip that my barn was being used as a chemical processing site. Special Agent Rodriguez and his team looked more annoyed than suspicious when they arrived. I walked them through the barn, showing them old tools, vintage electronics, and ordinary farm supplies. "Sir, I've been doing this for 20 years. Whoever filed these reports knows your exact schedule and property layout. This is targeted harassment." When a federal agent tells you you're being stalked, it hits different. The fire marshal came next, responding to multiple safety complaints. By that point, I wasn't even surprised anymore. It was like she had a calendar labeled ways to destroy decks, checking off a new box every day. But the moment everything changed was the night she tried to buy me off. I had just walked to my mailbox around dusk when Cordelia stepped out from behind her Lexus, holding a thick envelope, her eyes glassy and her jaw tight. $600,000, she said without a greeting, thrusting the envelope toward me. Cash, untaxed. Take it and disappear before I destroy everything you care about. I opened the envelope. Bundles of 20s and 50s, at least 60,000 visible on top layer alone. Dirty money that smelled like basements and desperation. "And if I don't?" I asked calmly. Her face twisted into something feral. "Then I'll make sure your children never feel safe again. I know their school, their schedules, their friends. Don't test me, Dex." For a split second, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms, but I held myself still. My security cameras were recording everything, her voice, her threats, the envelope, her expression. If she wanted to hand me the rope for her own hanging, I wasn't going to stop her. "Mrs. Blackthorne," I said quietly, "you just made the worst mistake of your life." She didn't know it, but she had just committed felony bribery, extortion, and a threat against minors on camera. After that, things turned violent. 2 nights later, I woke to my barn windows exploding, not from bullets, but from professional-grade paintball rounds. Bright orange paint splattered across the wood like grotesque graffiti. On the footage, Cordelia was fully decked out in camouflage, wielding a high-powered paintball marker like she was storming a training field. She brought a ladder to hit the upper windows. She worked fast, efficient, and with disturbing precision for someone her age. The next attack came 2 days later, when my mailbox, the same one protected under federal law, was smashed into twisted metal, the post bent like it had been hit by a bat. The smell of gasoline lingered in the air. She tried to burn the mail, but failed because the morning dew made her matches useless. My camera caught her fumbling with a lighter for 10 straight minutes, swearing under her breath. After that, Deputy Martinez called me. "Dex, we arrested her husband, Drake." Apparently, Drake had finally snapped and called the police on her when she tried to throw a lamp at him. He told investigators she had been spiraling for months, staying up late, ranting about me, drawing maps of my property, planning escalations, and worse, talking to people about getting rid of me entirely. This wasn't obsession anymore. This was dangerous, a sick, unraveling mind spiraling toward a point of no return. But Cordelia still wasn't done. She saved her boldest play for last. 3 days after her husband's arrest, the mayor called me personally. "Dex, I need to warn you. Cordelia has filed for emergency eminent domain seizure of your ranch. She's claiming it's needed for public safety and infrastructure." I felt the world tilt. Eminent domain, the nuclear option. She had convinced 3 council members to hold a vote with only 48 hours' notice, hoping no one would be there to oppose it. Their claims were fabricated. My barn stored hazardous materials, my well contaminated the water supply, my access road was a danger to school buses. All lies designed to legally steal my land. That was the moment I realized exactly what Cordelia was capable of. She wasn't just corrupt, she wasn't just power-hungry, she was willing to burn the entire county to the ground to get what she wanted. And that meant only one thing. I had to be ready to burn her empire down first, with truth, evidence, community, and the full force of the law behind me.
When Cordelia tried to seize my ranch through emergency eminent domain, something in me switched from defense to offense. I had spent months documenting every twisted thing she'd done, every illegal stunt, every lie, and now I was done waiting for justice to happen. I was going to make it happen. The 48-hour council vote she'd arranged was a desperate Hail Mary, but she underestimated one simple thing. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. That same night, I called an emergency meeting in Uncle Rusty's old barn. The smell of sawdust and oil still hung in the air, mingled with the faint metallic scent of history. One by one, the people Cordelia had hurt arrived. Javier Gonzalez with his stack of invoices showing unpaid HOA contracts, Martha Tatum with folders of fake health violations, and Rosa Martinez, the journalist, carrying her laptop like a sword. My lawyer, Maxine Torres, showed up last, heels clicking against the concrete floor, face set with the confidence of a woman about to go to war. We stood around Uncle Rusty's workbench, our war table, spreading out documents, screenshots, audio recordings, and video stills. The barn that once housed tools and hay now held the kind of evidence that could burn an empire. "All right," I said, taking a deep breath. "This isn't just about one crazy woman. It's about dismantling an organized network that's been destroying families for profit. We're going to end it here." Maxine leaned forward, eyes sharp. "We're building a RICO case. Racketeering, fraud, harassment, conspiracy, environmental crimes. This is organized corruption, Dex. We'll need everything airtight." Rosa was already mapping connections on a whiteboard she somehow managed to fit in her Honda Civic. Names, arrows, dollar amounts. It looked like a spiderweb of greed. Javier pointed to the bottom corner. "My cousin in city planning says Councilman Bradley's been fast-tracking Cordelia's development permits. Guess what? He's $48,000 in gambling debt to her husband, Drake." That explained the council's sudden interest in public infrastructure. Martha opened a cooler, handing everyone coffee and tacos from her food truck. "If she thinks she can silence an entire county, she picked the wrong people to mess with," she said, voice low but deadly calm. We worked late into the night, creating what Rosa called the evidence vault. Each piece of proof was duplicated, time-stamped, encrypted, and stored in multiple secure drives. My engineering background came in handy. Every file was blockchain verified to prevent tampering. If someone tried to erase the truth, we'd have a digital trail strong enough to drag the entire county administration down with her. The next morning, we got to work spreading the word. Rosa contacted her media network, sending confidential previews of her upcoming expose to local stations. Javier reached out to contractors and small business owners who had been bullied by Cordelia's inspection committees. Martha's food truck network mobilized across 3 towns, spreading word of the upcoming council meeting. Within 24 hours, half of Millfield County knew something big was coming. Meanwhile, Maxine filed emergency injunction papers to block the eminent domain vote until the allegations of corruption could be reviewed. It was a long shot, but it forced the city to acknowledge that they were under scrutiny. And scrutiny was the one thing Cordelia couldn't survive. But she wasn't done fighting either. As the public pressure built, she doubled down on her madness. Thursday night, my sensor motions pinged at 11:07 p.m., 3 figures moving near the barn. I switched to the security feed and froze. There she was again. Cordelia, wearing black, directing 2 men who were carrying gas cans. They were spreading accelerant along the base of my barn, the one piece of my family history still standing after 80 years. I grabbed my phone and called 911, my hands shaking but my mind eerily calm. "This is Dexter Morrison. I have live footage of an attempted arson on my property. Send everyone." Then I called Rosa. "Turn on your camera," I told her. "You're about to get your front page story." The next 5 minutes were chaos, sirens wailing in the distance, headlights cutting through the trees, Cordelia and her men panicking as they realized they'd been caught. They dropped the gas cans and ran into the forest, but the cameras had already captured everything. Faces, plates, timestamps. One of them even tripped and looked directly into the lens. It was over. By morning, the whole town knew. Rosa's article went live at sunrise. HOA president accused in arson and fraud scandal. Photos from the footage were everywhere. Cordelia's furious face illuminated by the flash of a lighter, the gas cans beside her Lexus. It went viral within hours. Local news vans parked outside Willowbrook Estates like vultures. But the biggest storm was yet to hit, the council meeting scheduled for that Friday evening. Cordelia still thought she could push her eminent domain claim through, maybe strong-arm enough officials before the fire caught her completely. But what she didn't realize was that by the time she walked into that meeting, we'd already set up the final trap. Friday night came cold and tense. The Millfield Community Center, built to hold 50 people, was packed with nearly 200. Reporters filled the aisles, cameras flashing. Outside, more residents gathered with signs reading, "No more HOA tyranny," and "Our land, our rights." I sat near the back, surrounded by Javier, Martha, Rosa, and Maxine. My heart pounded like thunder under my ribs, not from fear, but from anticipation. At 7:02 p.m., Cordelia walked in wearing her signature navy blazer, her hair perfectly styled, her fake smile plastered like armor. She scanned the crowd, trying to find support. There was none, only silence and cameras. She took her seat at the council table, beside her ally, Councilman Bradley, whose face looked 2 shades paler than usual. Mayor Hendricks cleared her throat. "This emergency meeting will now come to order to discuss the proposed eminent domain proceedings for the Morrison Ranch." Before anyone could continue, Rosa stood up. "Madam Mayor, I believe the public deserves to know that Mrs. Blackthorne was arrested last night for attempted arson." The room erupted. Reporters surged forward. Flashbulbs exploded like fireworks. Cordelia's face drained of color, her perfect posture collapsing for the first time. "That's a lie," she screamed, standing up, her voice breaking. "This is a conspiracy against me." But before she could spiral further, State Investigator William Tatum stepped up from the back of the room, his badge glinting in the fluorescent light. "Mrs. Blackthorne, you were arrested at 11:47 p.m. last night for attempted arson, criminal conspiracy, and environmental terrorism. Your accomplices have confessed." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the clicks of camera shutters. And that's when the floodgates opened. One by one, the victims stood up. Martha told her story about being harassed out of business. Javier talked about unpaid contracts and threats. An elderly veteran described being targeted for having a service dog. A single mother recounted how Cordelia weaponized child services to drive her away. Each voice added another nail to Cordelia's coffin, their testimonies echoing through the hall like a chorus of justice long denied. The evidence Rosa had gathered appeared on a projector: bank statements, HOA budgets, fake invoices, shell company links, even screenshots of Cordelia's social media posts bragging about "my next big project." When the video of her pouring gasoline at my barn played, the entire room gasped. You could see her face, her manic focus, her guilt and perfect clarity. Cordelia tried to speak, but the mayor cut her off. "Mrs. Blackthorne, you've shamed this community for long enough." I stood then, walking to the microphone. My voice was calm, steady. "As of this morning," I said, "I've donated 30 acres of my ranch to create the Uncle Rusty Memorial Nature Preserve. The creek and woodlands will be protected forever. No one will ever build a condo here." The room exploded in applause, the kind that shakes walls. Cordelia's mouth opened in silent horror, realizing that she had not only lost, but that I had turned the land she tried to steal into something eternal. Deputies moved in as her breakdown began, screaming, sobbing, kicking at chairs. As cameras captured every second, justice didn't need revenge that night. It needed light. And for the first time since this war began, the entire county saw her for what she truly was: a monster who finally met her match.
When the council meeting ended in a roar of applause and the deputies led Cordelia out in handcuffs, you'd think the storm was over. But in reality, that moment was only the beginning of a far bigger unraveling. The fallout from her arrest rippled through Millfield County faster than wildfire through dry brush. Overnight, every news station in Oregon picked up the story. HOA president arrested in arson plot, local HOA accused of massive fraud, environmental terrorism investigation underway. The headlines were everywhere. For a woman who lived her entire life trying to curate a perfect, spotless, rule-bound image, the humiliation was poetic. People who had once whispered around her now openly discussed her crimes at grocery stores, diners, hardware shops. Willowbrook Estates, once known for rigid lawns and uniform beige houses, immediately became synonymous with scandal. Reporters camped outside the entrance for days, and as cameras flashed, council members scrambled like ants kicked from a hill. Bradley Fleming,
The councilman who'd backed her eminent domain push resigned within 48 hours, but not before the press uncovered his gambling debts and suspicious financial transfers from Meadowlark Development, LLC. His fall was swift and absolute. One moment a smug public official, the next a disgraced bureaucrat sneaking out his back door under the cover of night. Meanwhile, investigators swarmed Willowbrook Estates. The FBI, the State Attorney General's office, the IRS, and even the EPA set up overlapping cases. Cordelia's well poisoning stunt had triggered federal environmental crime protocols, and once agents accessed the footage, they uncovered further evidence of chemical dumping tied to her developer partners. Every document she ever signed was pulled, analyzed, cross-referenced. HOA budgets, bank transfers, meeting minutes, emails, nothing was sacred anymore. And the deeper the investigators dug, the worse it got. They found that the HOA was missing $127,000, money she'd siphoned off over 4 years. They discovered backdoor deals with contractors, fraudulent inspection reports, and even extortion attempts on elderly homeowners. It wasn't just a neighborhood scandal. It was a RICO-level criminal enterprise built on intimidation, harassment, and financial exploitation. With Cordelia behind bars awaiting trial, the community, once fractured by fear, began coming together in ways I had never expected. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now approached each other with shared relief. People who had lived isolated in their homes for years began talking openly about their experiences. Some cried as they recounted the stress and anxiety she had caused. Others were angry, furious that they'd allowed one person to dictate the atmosphere of an entire neighborhood. The new interim HOA board, finally free of her iron grip, voted unanimously to suspend all HOA rule enforcement until legal reforms could be implemented. For the first time in a decade, residents were allowed to repaint their homes, plant whatever flowers they wanted, park their trucks in their own driveways without fear. It was as if the entire neighborhood exhaled for the first time in years. As for me, I spent the weeks after her arrest repairing the damages she had caused, fixing the barn windows, replacing the mailbox, rebuilding the section of fence cut by her goons. The county even sent volunteers to help clear the giant oak tree she had ordered cut down. But the biggest project by far was establishing the Uncle Rusty Memorial Nature Preserve. After my announcement at the council meeting, community members, environmentalists, and local volunteers came together to help restore the creek area, repair trails, and document local wildlife. The state awarded a $150,000 conservation grant, and schools began planning field trips before the preserve was even finished. The land Cordelia tried to steal was now protected forever. And every time I walked through those woods, I felt a sense of victory, deeper than any courtroom sentence could deliver. 6 months later, Cordelia's trial became one of the most watched cases in Oregon. I testified for 6 hours, walking the courtroom through every piece of footage, every document, every threat. The prosecution laid out her crimes like a roadmap of madness, harassment, embezzlement, fraud, attempted arson, environmental terrorism, conspiracy, bribery, extortion, and the attempted illegal seizure of private property. The jury didn't even need a full day. They found her guilty on all major counts. When the judge delivered her sentence, 3 years in federal prison for environmental crimes, plus 2 more for fraud and harassment, Cordelia's mask finally cracked. The courtroom watched her as she collapsed into her chair, the weight of her empire crumbling into dust around her. And for the first time in years, the family she had tormented finally felt closure. Her husband, Drake, completed his divorce within weeks and moved to Montana to start over. He told reporters that living with Cordelia had been like sleeping next to a ticking bomb. Several of her former board members were charged with lesser crimes, false reporting, misuse of HOA funds, and privacy violations. They received fines, probation, and mandatory community service hours. The developer partners paid massive penalties and were banned from future projects in the state. Even Councilman Bradley, facing charges of corruption and bribery, took a plea deal and disappeared from public life entirely. Our community wasn't just healing, it was transforming. The Evidence Vault and Rose's 3-part investigative series sparked statewide legislation for HOA accountability.
Neighboring counties launched investigations into their own HOAs and found similar abuses modeled after Cordelia's tactics. A documentary crew spent 2 weeks filming interviews and drone shots of the preserve, highlighting how a rural community fought and defeated an abusive system. My kids, Tyler and Madison, moved in with me permanently after my ex-wife saw how much happier and safer they felt at the ranch. Their school performance improved, their laughter returned, and our home became a place of joy instead of tension. We converted Uncle Rusty's workshop into a science and engineering lab for local kids, complete with donated computers, microscopes, and tools salvaged from Rusty's collection. Javier helped rebuild the roof, Martha provided lunch for every volunteer day, and neighborhood kids gathered to learn skills they'd never been exposed to before. The preserve attracted hikers, bird watchers, and families from all over the county. Tourists weren't visiting luxury condos. They were walking the same creek Cordelia tried to poison. The irony was perfection. People began calling me the man who beat the HOA Karen, but I always corrected them. This wasn't about beating a Karen. It was about exposing a decades-long machine of cruelty disguised as community standards. It was about protecting families who never had the chance to fight back. It was about honoring Uncle Rusty's land by ensuring no one like Cordelia could ever touch it again. Every evening, I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the trees sway in the breeze while my kids built the treehouse they'd always dreamed of. Sometimes I'd hear the creek bubbling gently in the distance, and it reminded me of something simple but powerful. Nature heals. Truth heals. Community heals. And justice, when it finally arrives, heals the deepest wounds of all. And as I looked over the ranch one evening with the last of the orange sunset fading behind the pines, I realized something else. The war was over, and we had won it completely.
6 months after the trial, life on the ranch settled into something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The kind of peace that doesn't whisper, but sinks deep into your bones. The chaos, the sirens, the courtrooms, the late-night strategy meetings, they all felt like a distant storm that had finally burned itself out. The mornings were different now. Instead of waking to the sound of Cordelia's Lexus blocking the road or the crunch of gravel beneath a stranger's surveillance car, I woke to sunlight warming the wooden porch and the laughter of my kids building their treehouse. Tyler hammered nails crookedly, Madison painted bright streaks of color across the planks, and for the first time in a long time, their childhood felt untouched by fear. The creek's steady murmur had become the soundtrack of our lives. Families from around the county now walked the trails of the Uncle Rusty Memorial Nature Preserve, admiring the moss-covered stones and towering pines that had stood through generations. That land, once targeted for luxury condos, was now protected by state law, preserved for wildlife, school field trips, community events, and long, quiet walks. Every time I hiked those trails, I felt Rusty beside me, the stubborn, brilliant man who built a trebuchet because the city wouldn't tow his neighbor's car. He would have loved knowing his land became a symbol of resistance against corruption. But peace didn't mean silence. The aftermath of exposing Cordelia created ripples far beyond Millfield County. Rosa Martinez's investigative series won a statewide journalism award, and she became the face of HOA reform in Oregon. Her articles sparked legislation that limited HOA power, required transparency in budgets, and enforced strict penalties for harassment and discrimination. The state attorney general publicly credited our case for exposing systemic abuse disguised as community governance. 3 other counties launched their own investigations, uncovering HOA networks that mirrored Cordelia's tactics: false reporting, targeted harassment, development corruption. It turned out she hadn't invented the blueprint. She had perfected it. Our victory became their roadmap. National HOA accountability groups contacted me for interviews. Documentaries requested footage from the evidence vault. Podcasters wanted to retell the HOA battle that shook Oregon. At first, I said no to most of them. I wasn't interested in fame, just in justice. But something changed the day a family from Washington drove 4 hours just to walk the preserve and thank me. They told me their HOA had used similar harassment to force them out because their autistic son made too much noise playing in the yard. They said my story gave them courage to fight back. And that was when I realized this wasn't just about me or my ranch anymore. It was about every family who had ever been bullied by people hiding behind rule books and clipboards. So I started speaking out, not for attention,
but for protection. Meanwhile, Willowbrook Estates transformed into something almost unrecognizable. Without Cordelia's iron grip, the new democratically elected HOA board eliminated 73% of her absurd rules. You could finally paint your door whatever color you wanted. People planted gardens again. Kids rode bikes without being followed by safety patrol. The property values, which Cordelia claims she was obsessed with protecting, actually increased nearly 23% once buyers learned her reign was over. The community, freed from her psychological chokehold, flourished. The veteran with the PTSD service dog moved back into the neighborhood after getting a settlement from the class action lawsuit. The single mother Cordelia had targeted returned to visit the preserve with her kids. They left a painted stone under a cedar tree with the words, "Thank you for fighting for us." Javier expanded his construction company and landed multiple county contracts, finally recognized for the work Cordelia had stolen from him. Martha opened a brick-and-mortar restaurant downtown. She named one of her signature dishes the Cordelia Special, extra spicy kimchi tacos with a kick strong enough to burn tyrants. I told her she should trademark that tagline. She said it was already printed on the menu. My kids adjusted to ranch life better than I ever expected. Tyler learned to fish in the creek, standing knee-deep in his rubber boots at sunrise. Madison started a nature photography club, using the preserve as her classroom. Their mother visited a few weekends and saw how much happier they were. One evening she said, "Dex, maybe this is where they're meant to grow up." That simple statement changed everything. When we finalized the paperwork for the kids to live with me full-time, it felt like winning a battle I didn't even know I was fighting. We turned Uncle Rusty's old workshop into a shared study space. Computers, tools, microscopes, shelves of science kits. Kids from all over the county started coming after school. We trained them in engineering basics, coding, wildlife tracking, woodworking, skills Rusty would have bragged about for years. And we called it Rusty's Lab, and it quickly became a beloved community hub. As for me, life didn't go back to the way it was before. It evolved into something better. The environmental lawyer who helped secure protected status for the creek, Emily Carter, started spending more and more time at the ranch. At first, she was just helping navigate legal documents, walking the property with her clipboard and boots, pointing out rare plant species, and advising me on water rights. Over time, those walks turned into shared lunches on the porch, then late-night conversations under the stars about life, justice, and second chances. She understood the weight of the past months, not with pity, but with strength. She wasn't intimidated by the chaos I had lived through. She admired the fact that I fought back. Somewhere between the trail markings and wildlife surveys, something real formed between us. My kids adored her, and Uncle Rusty would have too. She loved the land as much as he did. The real closure came the day the official RICO case against Meadowlark Development concluded. The developers paid $500,000 in fines and were banned from operating in Oregon for life. Councilman Bradley fled to Florida and vanished from the public eye. The corrupt building inspector resigned after investigators discovered the bribe deposits. Every person who participated in Cordelia's empire of control faced consequences. And the people she hurt, 12 families over 10 years, finally got restitution. The class action settlement totaled $1.8 million, divided among the victims. That money helped repair homes, restart businesses, and heal lives she had broken. It wasn't just about compensation, it was about recognition, about dignity restored. One crispy evening in late autumn, as golden leaves drifted across the creek, I walked along one of the new preserve trails. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, the way Oregon should smell. I stopped at a small overlook built by volunteers, a wooden platform facing the water. A plaque had been mounted there a week earlier. I hadn't seen it yet. It read, "Dedicated to those who stand their ground when no one else will." Underneath, in smaller letters, "In honor of the Morrison family and Uncle Rusty, whose land and courage protected us all." I stood there for a long time, listening to the water rush over the river stones, feeling the weight of everything we had survived. From the nights of surveillance cars watching my barn to the morning of Cordelia's public downfall, it all led to this moment. Not triumph, not revenge, but peace. A peace earned through resilience, truth, and community. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long shadows through the pines, I took a deep breath and whispered the same question I had asked at the beginning of this story. What would you do if someone tried to steal your family's land?
Now I knew the answer. You fight. You stand your ground. You unite with your community. And in the end, justice isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, like a creek flowing through land that's finally safe.